Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome to another edition of the Last Round Podcast, episode 77. Stuck inside. Again, I feel like we'll be saying this for quite a few more weeks, right, Mike?
It looks like it, unfortunately, but hopefully we could have some boxing, and looks like the UFC's starting up in 2 weeks, so I'll have something to watch at least. Right.
And there was some boxing this week in South America, so that's a positive, I guess. You know, that's something in terms of sports, because especially people out there, sports fanatics in general, you know, they need their sports content. So that's why obviously we're trying to put out our show every week as well, to try to give people some new things to look forward to. New interviews, new discussions and all of that. But as I mentioned, thank you for listening again, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, you're watching on YouTube or Unboxing Socials YouTube. We appreciate it. And this week, we obviously have another guest. If you're watching right now on YouTube, you can obviously see who it is. We've been wanting to get him for a while. We've been talking about getting him for a while. He was one of our favorite fighters at the time when he was active, and even now, of all time, at that time when he was fighting. And I think, obviously, we'll get into it, but I think you still had a lot left in the tank when you retired. I think you still could have probably took over that division, but he's the former unified WBC, WBO, Ring Magazine, and lineal middleweight champion of the world. He made 3 successful defenses of that title in the 2000s, the mid-2000s. You can now find him running his own gym in Youngstown, Ohio, and I believe you just developed a brand new application, a mobile application called the Sweet Science Plus. Yes. From Youngstown, Ohio, Kelly Pavlik is on the show this week. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good. So, just at the top, just before we started recording here, how you holding up in this whole new world of quarantine we got here?
Man, it's getting tough. Like you mentioned, I have a gym in Youngstown. I'm in the process of opening a boxing gym. The one gym I have is a fitness gym. I'm in the process of opening a boxing gym. I have my charitable organization, got the app, doing sports testing throughout the country. So I'm all over the place. And going from doing all that to just being shut down completely, the first week and a half, it was nice. I was like, I could use this, and now I'm starting to, get a little antsy. So,
when's the last time you before all this obviously started happening? When's the last time you think you were inside for this amount of time, this long?
I can't tell you. I mean, I really can't. Even as a kid, I mean, you go outside, you play with your friends, or you do something. I'm being pretty strict on the family and the kids. My wife actually is. We don't want to take any chances and stuff like that. So, we're really doing a quarantine. For the most part, we get out as going to the grocery store or something like that. And even then we do the Instacart where they bring the groceries to the house. So it's tough. I mean, I'll go out there in the yard or out in the driveway and play some basketball with my son, but it's getting tiring, especially when you have a lot of stuff going on investment wise and, owning a couple of businesses and stuff like that. When you got to sit back and just let it sit, it gets a little frustrating.
What's the one thing that you miss from the, the normalcy of the world that, I guess you took for granted before we kind of got stuck inside here?
Just that, to be honest, I'm pretty simple, but just the fact of being able to go and go to the gym, go do the everyday thing without fear of getting sick or contracting the coronavirus or bringing it to a loved one, things like that. I mean, when you're stuck to the house, it's a little different when you can't do those things.
You're still living in Ohio. You're Ohio born and bred. What is it about Ohio that makes so many good boxers? You've got Ray Boom Boom Machidi, Broner, Crawford, Aaron Pryor, Ernie Shavers.
I don't know. It's a good question. It's a blue collar state. It's tough. I don't know. A lot of athletes. So even for like Youngstown, even with football, I mean, right now or a couple years ago, I know we ranked per capita the most NFL players put into the NFL, big Division One, NCAA. We do big in. So I don't know what it is. Just a lot of great athletes in this area.
I think I'm right in saying that you started in actually Taekwondo before you moved into boxing. Is that right?
I did. I played. Excuse me. I played a little bit of Pee Wee football up till I was about 12. I played baseball till I was like 18. I loved baseball. Or 17. I take that back. And then, my age group coming up, that's when like the karate movies were pretty big, and Karate Kid and all those were coming out. So I was always running around the house doing flying kicks and punching. And my brothers, I have two older brothers. I'm the youngest. My oldest brother is 6 years older than me, and my middle brother is 4 years older than me. They were going to the boxing gym, and I finally got my parents to take me to do martial arts, but I didn't like it. It was boring to me. There wasn't enough contact going on, and my parents didn't want me to box, and they kept telling me they didn't want me to box. And eventually they let me go to the gym, and I eventually ended up sparring, and I got my butt whipped the first time, and they were excited because they thought that I was going to not want to box no more. And to their surprise, the next day I came home, went and grabbed my clothes and my gym bag, and wanted to go back to the gym. So
what?
The karate, the martial arts, it was cool. It just wasn't my cup of tea. And the boxing was, along with the other sports. Like I said, I boxed. I was about 10 years old when I got to the gym. So I played a little bit of football off and on while I was boxing. And then I also had the baseball and stuff like that.
So what was you mentioned some of like the movies, obviously Karate Kid and stuff like that. Like, what about like the Jean-Claude Van Damme, the blood sports and the kickboxers and stuff? Were you fans of those?
Yeah, Lionheart, Bloodsport, you name it, those. What Best of the Best came out. That was a great one. The Bruce Lee movies. So all that. There was No Retreat, No Surrender with Jean-Claude Van Damme. I don't know if you guys remember that one.
I do, yeah.
All those started coming out, man, and that was what I did. And then, of course, it's like a brother of mine. He lived across the street, and he was the same age as my older brothers. His dad had kids at an older age, and his father was always a lot older. Fought in World War II, had the box right before he went into the army, and in the late 20s, and he had these old school boxing gloves. So me and my buddy, which I was much younger, my brothers, we would go in the backyard and get the old cooking timer and use that as the rounds, and we go beat the shit out of each other for 6 minutes, and that's before I even started boxing.
Right. And
I would come home, before I got to the house, I wipe all the stuff off me to make sure, because if I would have got in trouble for saying I was boxing, and fighting, but if I was playing football and got roughed up, it's different that way. So I would just try to hide that a little bit. And, but yeah, that's all boxing for me. There's just a lot of things that really got me into the boxing part.
And you had a pretty successful amateur career, over 100 amateur fights.
Yeah, I did. Again, I would say from about 11 years old to 15, I went to tournaments here and there. A lot of show fights. Again, I was involved with football still, which took up some time, and baseball, even though my heart was with the boxing. But, during football season, I would go to the gym a little bit, and I really didn't fight during the football season. Baseball was kind of the same. But I think when I got to 16 years old, or 15, 16, I really buckled down on the boxing and really started putting it in at the gym. And that's when I really started noticing, my talent and everything, and going to certain tournaments where these kids were, boxing already had maybe 10 fights that year or 15 fights that year. I was beating those type guys, and I was beating some of the guys that were ranked 8th or 9th in the country. And then right about 16 years old, going into my, turning 17, was when I really started winning the National Golden Gloves. I won the National Silver Junior Golden Gloves. I won the Under-19s and the National Junior Pal Tournament.
When did you realize, Kelly, that like, especially when you began your pro career and you kept fighting, obviously, and you attained a world title? What moment, even if it was before the world title, what moment did you realize, like, hey, I think I made it as a pro boxer? Because it's not an easy career to take on, and you made it to the highest levels of it. At what moment do you believe that you felt that feeling?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, starting off, when you get signed by Top Rank, especially coming out of the amateurs as young as I was, obviously, it's hard to explain. If they want to sign you, they see something. You know what I mean? So that says a lot right there. That gives you some of that confidence going into your career when you get signed by a big time promotional company. It's like getting drafted by a farm team or AAA team in major leagues, or even the major league team. So obviously you're there and you're right in that area.
Mm-hmm.
I would say though, probably after like my 12th pro fight, because some of the guys Top Rank put me in with, if you go back and you look at my box rec, there was a couple of guys that were 500 or over 500 in losses. But for the most part, a lot of the guys were 9 or 10, 12-2. They had winning records, and some of the guys that had power, and Top Rank, Bruce Trampler, the matchmaker, he would put me into fights where I wasn't supposed to go in and get beat, but he wanted me to get a test. He wanted me to go to the 8 rounds or 10 rounds, and it made his job hard because none of them guys went the distance. You know what I mean? I think at one point, I don't know, I think it was 14 or 15-0 with 14 or 15 knockouts at one point. So I say, like, when I started getting right in that area, it's one thing to go in there and beat them guys and outbox them and win a decision, but when you're going in there and just demolishing opponents and knocking them out, and you get to 14, 15-0 with 14, 15 knockouts against pretty good competition. That's when I really started, the confidence really got higher.
So, when you won the title in 2007, or the titles from Jermaine Taylor, there was obviously some issues with the crazy scorecards at that time, and when we were kind of looking into information on what to ask you, stuff we try to mix up the questions and stuff. There was some information that says that you and your father accidentally left your paychecks in the hotel room around that time. What was going on there?
Yeah, that's actually pretty funny. It got blown out of proportion. I know the Top Rank was never supposed to let that leak, and they did. But let me explain to you how that happened. I don't know if you guys heard or seen, but that was like one of the craziest things for a title fight. How the city of Youngstown reacted to it, and there was 6,500 Youngstown people at the fight, just all over the place. I mean, it was wild. And so, long story short, we won the world title. So right there, you're kind of you're all over the place. My dad always took the checks, my checks, because you have boxing trunks on, hand wraps, gloves, and you go back to the dressing room, you got a shower, this, that. And my dad, of all people, it's hard for him to shit a penny out. You know what I mean? Like he watches stuff closely. And
right.
Again, so throughout my entire career, all 7 years of the pros, he always handled that. And right after the fight, the hotel rooms were pretty small there in Atlantic City. And I wasn't one for really wanting to go to the after parties and be around everybody. I was banged up. My nose was sore. So I just kind of wanted to go to the hotel room and chill.
Right.
So of course, when you have that contingency of Youngstown fans there, you got to say hi. You got to let people come in. So probably about 30 of the closest people I knew came into the room, and everybody was just all over the place, screaming, loud, celebrating. And we had to fly out at 7 o'clock the next morning. So mind you, by the time the post-fight conference, by the time you get back to the ring or to the dressing room, shower, do your piss test, for the drug test, and do all that stuff, then get to the post-fight conference and get done with that, you're already looking at 1:30 in the morning, almost
right.
2.
Right.
So we literally had like 3 hours of crazy back at the hotel room, and we had to go catch our flight.
Right.
So my dad put the check because he didn't want to keep it in the back pocket, so he hid it in the room and had it like where nobody would ever know where it's at. And I guess the way everything unfolded, we're running late for the airport.
Right.
So we hurried up and got everything packed, got out of there, and he ended up leaving the check. We're on the way to the airport, and he goes, "Oh shit!" He goes, "You're gonna kill me." And I was like, "What?" He goes, "I left the check." In all reality, it was no big deal. First of all, you have to have a hold on that check anyways before you can even get cash.
Right.
So, but yeah, everybody took that and had fun with that story.
And then when you went back to Youngstown, you were met by something like 35 police cars and fire trucks, which took you into Youngstown. There was a big parade.
Yeah, it was crazy. I wasn't expecting that either. Now, mind you, my quarterman at the time was a Youngstown cop, so he had a little bit to do with that, I guess. And, he called and had them all waiting. So as soon as I hit the Ohio line, they kind of just followed us right to my house. Yeah, it was neat. It was a nice homecoming.
So, Kelly, kind of moving on to there was rumors around the time, like, how close were you fighting Joe Calzaghe when you were active? What's going on there?
A lot of that stemmed from, to be honest, I don't think it was that close, to be honest with you. And the one thing with boxing is this. All the time the fighters get blamed for ducking or not taking a fight. And people don't realize that the fighters will fight anybody. It's the handlers, it's the top people, the boss that pick and choose the fights. Yeah, I mean, we have a saying we have an opinion on it, but usually whatever the promoter wants is how it turns out. Calzaghe, I would have liked that fight. I think Joe Calzaghe was one of the most underrated champions of all time. The guy could fight, and there's no denying that. But I did want that fight, but at the same time, Joe was a super middleweight. So when all that talk really started getting going was when I fought Gary Lockett after the second Taylor fight.
Right.
Because Joe Calzaghe's dad was his trainer and everything else. And that's when all the war of words started happening between my trainer and Enzo Calzaghe. Joe's dad was for the Gary Lockett fight. And so that kind of got built up that way. It was never between the promoters wanting to fight or me wanting to fight. Again, I was campaigning at middleweight at that time. It was hard to make middleweight, but I just got done defending the title against Gary Lockett, and I was just on a streak. So as far as fighting Joe, I don't think it was ever a negotiation, but I think more of that stemmed from the trainers firing at each other. Enzo saying stuff to Jack saying stuff to Enzo. That kind of built that up. And then, of course, me beating Lockett.
Another big British fighter that we talk of was 2010 after Carl Froch beat Lucien Boutte. He spoke about possibly fighting you. Was that ever close?
No, because again, super middleweight. I was at all the way up to 2000, end of 2010. I was a middleweight. Froch, I really never had anything offered to me on that. After watching him fight Jermaine Taylor, I really wanted to fight him, but at that time, I guess the Super 6 tournament was still going on, which going into the fact of when I retired early, that there was a lot to do with that whole situation going on. But Froch, no, there was never no talk of that. There was a lot of fights. Obviously, the Paul Williams fight fell out twice, which was one of the main reasons I fought Bernard Hopkins, 2 weight classes up. I'm not making no excuses or anything, but I took every choice I made in boxing or whatever I did, it seemed like it was magnified a little more than the others. And I'm not going to hop into it and say what I'm talking about, but it was crazy. So me wanting to fight or Paul Williams, and it turned into I ducked him, and then because I had a staph infection, and when this all happened, this all came about was all down to again the promoters just wasn't working out with Lou DiBella and Top Rank. So after the second time, that's when I jumped up to light heavyweight. So people don't understand this, and some of these boxing people are just too unknowledgeable. If I was afraid and I was ducking a welterweight coming up to middleweight, but yet I jump up 2 weight classes to light heavyweight to fight a legend. Does that make any sense?
Right, exactly. Right.
So I wanted a Paul Williams fight. Paul Williams, great fighter, bless him. But, at that time he was coming up. He wasn't even a big puncher for 47, in my opinion. He was just a guy who threw a lot of punches. On the other side of that, here you got me, who was a natural middleweight, who threw 89 to 90-some punches around with heavy bombs behind him. I would have loved to have fought Williams. I really wanted the Arthur Abraham fight, who he held the other titles, or the other title at middleweight. And those fights never got negotiated. And I don't blame Top Rank on that one because Arthur Abraham and his people wanted me to go over to Germany to fight him when we were in fact, the lineal champion. Should have been undisputed, but we were the champ, the main one. He should have came to the States to fight. So
right.
It was just a lot of that within the negotiations. The fights weren't made.
Another fight that we didn't get to see was you against famous internet troll Charlie Zelenoff when he called you out.
Oh, jeez. I know. I'm telling you. He was calling my house and everything.
What?
Yeah, we're not my house, but I'm at home sitting there calling my cell phone. And I'm going, how the hell did he get my number? I mean, he was making it. Finally, one time I answered, and I'm just laughing. And I just couldn't. There's something wrong with that guy. I think everybody knows that. And, the funny thing about my brother, he cracks my brother up. My brother watches him all the time on YouTube. And I started watching his stuff on Charlie Z, and I was laughing. Like, I'd watch it. I watched Deontay Wilder beat the shit out of him. I watched a couple other guys beat the hell out of him. And then all of a sudden, like, I'm over and laughing at this. And then next thing I know, I find myself being involved in the shit with Charlie Z. I was just, oh, my God. Yeah, that kid got issues, man. I think, sadly, it's funny watching it. But I unfortunately, I think he's going to eventually hurt somebody or somebody's going to hurt him real bad. I think that's the way it's going to end for him.
What would he say when he would call?
Oh, that I fought bombs and I ain't never fought nobody like him, and we should set this up and go at it. And I ain't got no power to hurt. I ain't got enough power to hurt him. Oh no, it was.
He was really trying to get under your skin. I
think, like I said, I'm not lying. I think it's funny as hell. The shit he does. When he was talking to me, I couldn't even get mad at it. You know what I mean? But at the same time, it's unfortunately it's going to be something that happens bad to him, or he does something bad to somebody else.
Right.
The kids now, they're
Well, talking about internet personalities, I guess, or stuff like that. Obviously, within the last 8-9 months or a year or so, YouTubers have actually came into the boxing world on like a pro level and been on, DAZN, especially with Matchroom, Eddie Hearn, and stuff like that. You obviously, as a former professional fighter, who former world champion, what's your opinion on that whole situation with YouTubers?
We talked about that on my podcast, and we had mixed emotions on it with the listeners. Here's my take. First of all, the guy, if they want to do it, let them do it. What's it hurt in boxing? And when I say that, boxing has done well the last 2 years, the numbers and everything else, which is good. But boxing, if these guys got 100,000 people they bring to new people to cross over to boxing, I think boxing needs that, right?
Right.
I don't see what it's hurting. The numbers are not that great with boxing. So if that could be that little shot in the arm for boxing, you guys are going to cry about it. I'll tell you. I mean, like, secondly, they weren't that bad. They didn't come in and really disrespect the sport. I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, they what's his name?
Logan Paul.
His name, the white kid.
Logan Paul.
Logan Paul, and the other kid. I mean, but for not being boxers, they looked actually pretty good. They threw fairly good punches. They went to rounds. I mean, so it wasn't. They didn't spit on the sport and come in and slap like a tough man brawler, a club smoker at a bar. They came in and they boxed, and if they brought people to the sport, they may have brought in 40 or 50,000 other people over to the sport. Who knows? But that's what boxing needed. I mean, they're selling it out. You got guys like Lomachenko, who I love, and I think is a pound-for-pound guy, who has a hard time selling a 2,500-seat arena, smaller part of Madison Square Garden out. Right?
Mm-hmm. Right. I
mean, some of these guys, other than your Wilder, Pacquiao, Mayweather, people are having a hard time selling these venues out.
Mm-hmm.
And they're smaller ones. So if this is what boxing needs, let it be. It ain't bothering or nothing. The people that want to cry about it, most of them are people who've never really done shit with the sport anyways. Mm-hmm. So, if they want to come over and do that, so be it.
I know last year you were talking about maybe coming back at cruiserweight on the Joe Rogan podcast with one of your ex-foes, Sergio Martinez, talking about coming back and facing Chavez. Could there be some sort of revenge fight maybe?
No, we're done. The Joe Rogan thing, it was at the point, and I clearly stated on Joe Rogan that I have the itch here and there. And I was considering it, but I never really said that I was going to do it. Again, I've done well for myself. I've been retired, going on 8 years now. In July will be 8 years. I've put money away. I have, like I said, investments, and I just moved on. I'm enjoying life right now. There ain't no comeback. Too old now, 38. Been out for 8 years. In that sport, if you retired, or if you took a break at 22 years old and you came back at 23, a year or so, people don't realize this, but it's hard to get that back that time you lost, let alone being 38 years old and being out for 8 years. And I'm at 245 pounds now doing powerlifting. You ain't going to see my big ass lose that weight if I don't have to.
When you retired, did the Andre Ward fight fall through? Or did you just decide that you didn't want it anymore and you turned down the big payday?
All right. Well, I'm going to tell you guys straight up on that. First of all, when I won the world title, I told my wife and a couple other people, and this is for all the shit out there, like, oh, well, his personal life and this and that. I've retired because when I won the world title, as most fighters go and they look for the next big fight. After I won the world title, I was counting down to retirement. Mm-hmm. Like Robert Garcia, like many other guys who have retired at a young age, there was no other reason than I just didn't want to do it no more. I mean, I did and I didn't, but I wasn't doing it for me. It was, and if you don't have that there in your heart, if you have that little bit missing, it's a dangerous sport to be in, especially at that level. So when I retired, a lot of things came into play. I ended up going to California to train. And it was great because Robert Garcia is a phenomenal trainer to camp, to everybody out there in Oxnard is unbelievable. And I went out there and I kind of didn't want to leave though. Usually when you up and leave town is at the beginning of your career. When you haven't won a world title, when you ain't making the money, when you're super hungry, that's when you leave town. A lot of fighters don't leave town 10 years after being pro, 3 world titles and a couple million in the bank. You just don't leave home. I had 2 young kids here at the time, but I did it anyways because I was at that part where I didn't know what I wanted to do. And it was kind of cool to go see something different and maybe learn something else. So I went out to California and I trained with Robert, and I had 3 fights there with him, and they were against lower names, you know what I mean? So that really started getting frustrating. Like the first 2 was cool. But after that, I was frustrated a little bit. Then the Andre Ward fight was in the works, and it was just about done, signed, and I was super pumped about that fight. And that's when he had to pull out because he hurt his shoulder, ended up having shoulder surgery. And that's when I retired, because that right there just zapped everything out of me. I was done. I had 42 pro fights. Okay, that's a lot of fights. Mm-hmm. That's I held the title for 3 years. A lot of people think my career started in 2007. It didn't. I turned pro in 2000. So almost 13 years pro and 42 pro fights. I was done. The Andre Ward would have been cool, and I would have took that, but that's the reason I retired. And once I did, like I said, I didn't have to go back to boxing. It just wasn't for me. Now with boxing, I moved on to a different chapter in the sport. I've opened a boxing gym, and I'm going to start doing that with people and training fighters. But that was the reason behind retiring, and it was mainly because of the fallout of the Andre Ward fight. Again, you're fighting the guys that I was fighting, and then you have a chance to fight another all-time great like Andre Ward, and then that fight's not there. And there was no big fight out there for like another year and a half. There wasn't even a meaningful fight out there because a lot of the guys were in that Super 6 tournament, and at that point I was campaigning at 168. So there was nothing there.
You seem to enjoy your time at the Robert Garcia gym. I saw a video of you putting a snake in Pelos's gym bag. They also came out and wrote all over your car and spelled your name wrong.
Yeah. The late Pelos Garcia, rest in peace, my buddy. Yeah, he actually started that. And then it wasn't my car. The funniest part about that whole prank, see, the snake ended up getting put in his car. Or in his bag after they got the car. But here's the funnier part. So when I went out there, that was Robert Garcia's car. And he let me use that as a rent-a-car. So in all reality, Pelos got his uncle.
Oh.
You know what I mean? That was his car. So, but still, he attempted to get me. So I had to pay him back.
So do you touching on Robert Garcia, obviously he's one of the most prominent boxing trainers in the game right now. He's been so for years now. Would you say that he's probably the most well-rounded, maybe best trainer in the game as compared to maybe a Freddie Roach or Lomachenko's father or anything like that, the other players in that game?
Yeah, them guys, Lomachenko's dad, Freddie Roach, there's a big thing where people get into that with boxing, and that was one of them. Before I even left to go train with Robert Garcia, and you always hear people say well, Freddie Roach wasn't that good of a trainer until he got Pacquiao, but Pacquiao was already established. You hear that shit. Mm-hmm. But there's a reason, and I'm going to explain this to some of these people don't realize. The people that are in boxing, okay, these matchmakers, promoters, this has been their life for years, okay? So they know what they're talking about. And when they make a fighter go to a trainer from that promotional company, there's a reason why they're doing that, because that trainer is that good. This promotional company's got probably hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars invested in the fighter. So when you hear people say that, they're full of shit. Going out to Robert Garcia, so being with Robert Garcia and comparing him to Freddie Roach and them guys, they're all great. Buddy McGirt, Joe Goose, and they're all great trainers. Ricky Funes, Rudy Hernandez, phenomenal. They've been there. They've been at the World Experience or the World Championship level with the experience for that. Cutman, you name it. And the same with Robert Garcia. Robert Garcia built himself a stable of fighters that's next to none. I mean, you go out there. If Robert Garcia was the worst trainer in the world, his fighters are still going to do great because of all the sparring and talent they got out there, But on top of that, Robert Garcia is just that good of a trainer. So there is levels to things. And when people say that, it's the truth. And they need to hear that. When you hear from people that been at the top or been in the top out of any sport, music, when you hear there's levels to shit, it's true, And these guys are the real deal.
So whilst you were out in California at that time, you actually sparred with a 15-year-old David Benavidez, who's actually now the WBC champion. Could you tell at the time he was going to be good? Or?
Oh, absolutely. We went in there. I was told over and over he's 15, and that didn't stop that little son of a bitch from going in there and hitting me. So, but he's good. And to this day, I tell everybody, at 168, if Bivol comes down from 175, which I keep hearing that he may do that to fight at super middleweight, that's the only person that I see that might be a little bit of a threat to Benavidez. Canelo, I think, is a fantastic fighter. I think right now he deserves the pound for pound 1 or 2 spot. But he went up and he beat a really good Kovalev, that light heavyweight. And everybody says Kovalev was old, but nobody carried that same energy before he fought Kovalev. It was for Canelo. They're all 2 weight above
right
weight, and Kovalev was old. But Benavidez, I think Canelo needs to stay away from him. I think if I was Bivol coming down, that is just the one. Even though Bivol's doing what he's doing at light heavyweight and he's coming down a weight class, Benavidez is still that type fighter. If there's anybody at 168 right now that I think would beat Benavidez, would be Bivol. If I was Canelo, I would avoid that fight, and I would avoid the other guys at 175.
Do you think? Speaking of Bivol, he's obviously I think he's got the WBA at the 175 title. Do you think that he's in a tough spot because he's obviously a world champion, but he doesn't? There's a lot of guys that we've seen in interviews at 175 that say like, he has a title, but he doesn't bring any money to the table. Like you, especially being when you were a unified world champion and everything like that. Like, how did you balance something like that, or when you had to like find an opponent or stuff like that, in terms of the drawing power they have and making money with them? Because I feel like Bivol's in a tough spot right now with that.
Well, it's tough. It is. Going back to that with Paul Williams, one of the main reasons I jumped 2 weight classes to fight Hopkins was because there was already rumors that I backed out of the Paul Williams fight, which I do not understand where on earth anybody would have got that at. I just came off the fight, even though I fought Edison Miranda, Jermaine Taylor, that Gary Lockett, people dealt with that. They were like, okay, he has some tough fights. Gary Lockett's cool. But if I would have turned back around and fought another Gary Lockett type guy because Paul Williams fell out, I would have been blasted big time,
Right.
So for me, in my head, where the pressure came and the choice was, somebody threw Top Rank threw out the name. They gave me the option. 2 other names that nobody really heard of or going up to fight Bernard Hopkins. I said, I better go up and fight Bernard Hopkins.
Right.
And there was a lot behind that too, but that was the situation. So it's kind of same with Bivol. I mean, it sucks in that position. His is a little different than mine. High risk, low reward, I guess, from the way other fighters are looking at it. But you know what? He's a champion. He's a champion at that weight class, and he holds one of the big belts.
Right.
If you are going to be that champion, fight it, because I think that's a lot of people's excuse, because they know that their chances of winning against him are a lot slimmer than any other person in that light heavyweight.
Do you think Benavidez is the best 168 pounder at the moment? I mean, Canelo's obviously campaigned at 168, but in terms of like a real 168 pounder who's actually been fighting at that weight class consistently, would you say Benavidez is the best?
Yeah. And, Canelo don't have to at 168 because he went to 175 and beat one of the top very strong guys, again with Kovalev. So Canelo could respectfully go back down to 168, and I think he proves himself there, okay? But I don't think he beats Benavidez. And again, I think Bivol is the only one that fight I have with a toss-up, with Benavidez. But I think Benavidez right now other than Bivol, right now, since Bivol's at light heavyweight, I think Benavidez stands alone at 168 as the best one. Right.
And then kind of rewinding it back into the trainer, because you made me think of this when you mentioned how, an investment, how a promoter has an investment in a fighter. They might have hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars. When you mentioned that, what came to mind was Ryan Garcia with Golden Boy. when they picked him up, he was training, I believe, under his dad and his family. And then I think Golden Boy started to see that there was a lot more potential, especially financially, behind him. And so they put him with Canelo's team. Would that be like a good example? What did you think about that when they moved him from his family to San Diego to train with Canelo and his team?
I guess I don't know. Here's what I could probably say on it. First of all, De La Hoya is marketing him as De La Hoya was marketed by Top Rank. Yeah, I see a lot of that. De La Hoya was De La Hoya could fight though, and proved with the Olympics and a gold medal that he was the legit though. Ryan Garcia, in my opinion, is one of them kids that come along. They take a little longer to mature, but I think Garcia is going to be a fine fighter. And they got his looks and his Instagram followers, and so I think De La Hoya is doing the right thing with Ryan Garcia in the way he's moving him. He's just pushing him in slowly and building this kid up as a superstar. As far as leaving his trainer, again, I don't know what habits or what he may have done. I can't tell you this, that he looks sharper and sharper every fight. So that tells you a lot right there, that whoever he's got training him now is doing a fantastic job. But, maybe there was just something there. De La Hoya is a very smart businessman and a very smart guy when it comes to boxing. De La Hoya is a very smart businessman, and De La Hoya was promoted by one of the best promotional companies, and he's been running his own promotional company now for a decade that's doing very well. So De La Hoya knows what he's doing and why he took Ryan Garcia away from the original trainer and moved him with somebody else. That's the only thing I can say about that. Again, I don't know whoever trained him before, if it was his dad or whoever it was, how many world champions they had before Ryan Garcia, but that makes a big difference.
Kelly, have you ever thought about moving into the game as, like a manager or a trainer? Because you obviously have the experience. Your breakdown and analysis of fights and fighters is very good. So, I think you'd be someone quite well to help the young fighters along.
Yeah, I think there should be consultants for fighters as far as how the business part of the sport and everything else. As far as training, I don't want to manage. I do not want nothing to do with that part of it. That's okay. But training guys, that's why I am looking to open a gym. The boxing gym is my next big thing. And like I said earlier, that's the next chapter in boxing that I want to move into, is working with the fighters. It would be fun for me. And absolutely, I would like to. Maybe some commentating if there's open time for that, something like that.
Speaking about like the landscape in terms of like television for boxing right now, there's like Fox, Showtime's still there, and then the new player in town, DAZN. You fought on HBO during your career. When HBO announced that HBO boxing was kind of folding, what was your immediate reaction, especially somebody who grew up on HBO and fought on HBO?
It was hard, man. It sucked. Them commentators were great. Lampley, Letterman, all them guys, Max. It was hard to see it go. It really was. It was a huge part in boxing over the last 2 to 3 decades. I didn't like it. I really didn't. But I think that, unfortunately, it's the technology today. It's the software. It's the media. Everything is changing. Apps are huge, and the DAZN coming out for $10 a month to be able to see. I think they might be up to $20 now, but to be able to see the type of fights that you see on that ESPN Plus app, ESPN is picking up now. ESPN back in the day used to be for up and coming contenders, and the biggest payout purse was like 10 to 15,000 on there. You might get lucky to see a couple title fights. Now ESPN is starting to become, putting on big world title fights. You see them with Lomachenko and a lot of the lighter weight guys, but they're big, huge fights. Boxing is evolving into another whole different picture. It's crazy. The promotion for it, social media has changed boxing. And I think, unfortunately, I don't want to see Showtime go anywhere. But to me, I think in 8 years, is it out of the question that you have Showtime? No. I think it might be opened up to the apps.
Kelly, did you know that you were ranked 8th by Bleacher Report in a list of boxers most likely to have a movie made about their lives?
For real?
Yep.
Who would play my part? Charlie Z?
Maybe. I mean, what's your immediate reaction to something like that? Bleacher Report, they're obviously pretty prominent. 8th, they ranked you 8th in terms of making a movie about you. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I mean, I know what they're going to want to do, but money talks, bullshit walks. So let's see what they bring to the table. You know what I mean? I'm business.
Were you ever approached, especially post-retirement, by any network to maybe do like a commentating gig or anything like that? Because we obviously see a lot of retired fighters do as commentators. Were you ever approached for anything like that?
No. I never really put anything out there or was out there for that. I would love to do it. Actually, I did a UFC Fight Pass, in Pittsburgh.
Right.
One of the Dana White shows on that. The UFC Fight Pass. But, I do want to do that. I am looking to eventually get involved in that with the one of the networks or the Zone or somebody. We've put some fillers out there. We've had people go out and network to see what we could do, but it's hard right now because that's hard to get into. You got retiring fighters all the time who are getting into that field. So I mean, after listening to some of the commentators, I think I can stand a good chance of getting there.
And then in terms of the young fighters, like we touched on like a Ryan Garcia, and then you got like a Devin Haney and stuff, and the young fighters up and coming up who everybody looks as like the next crop of fighters to carry the sport in the next decade or what have you. Is there one of them or maybe a couple of them that you see like, okay, that guy is going to stand out from the rest, in terms of being special from your standpoint?
Yeah, there could be. I think, you mentioned Haney. Haney has a good chance. He's just in a crowded, talented division. Mm-hmm. I mean, all them guys are right within a weight class or so apart. But, again, Lomachenko is there. He's, 32 now?
Right.
I don't know how much longer. The unfortunate part with such talent like Lomachenko is this. Usually speed, reflexes are the first to go. The last thing to go is power with age. Mm-hmm. Lomachenko, on the other hand, has really created his whole entire style around his natural abilities that are God-gifted, and I haven't seen anything like.
Right.
But eventually, that will start slowing down,
mm-hmm.
And part of his superhero force that he has will be diminishing. So we don't know, but for the time being, I think we have another good 2 years out of Lomachenko. Teofimo, so even the winner of that, but even a loss for Teofimo, I think he's the type guy that could really add something to the sport. He's flamboyant, he's flashy, he's explosive, he can fight. Teofimo Lopez as a guy. Some of the heavyweights, everybody wants to hold on. Unfortunately, the way it goes, that there's really only one weight class that can bring boxing mainstream along, other than names like Floyd Mayweather and Pacquiao. But you need some heavyweights, some more big fights going on there. But guys like Haney, Teofimo, I would say Lomachenko, but if he hasn't done it yet, I don't think he's going to bring the sport up anymore. But Crawford, unfortunately, right now is talented, but he don't bring much. Spence really hasn't. I don't know. It's a hard question. It's hard to figure it out. Who could be the next crossover guy for boxing?
Kelly, looking back on your career, is there anything that you would change?
That's a hard one, man. I don't know how to answer it. I guess it's hard. There were some issues. There were some issues with the Hopkins fight. I never came out and said anything about it because I would have been blasted. But but if I would have canceled or pulled out, I would have took it really bad because again, that was coming off after the Paul Williams fight fell through. So that was tough. The Sergio Martinez fight, and I know even now it sounds funny because I'm mentioning the 2 fights I lost, but the Sergio Martinez fight, I really on that. I wonder if I came in a pound and a half heavy, and said, "Screw it, strip me of the belts, take them," because it's my last fight at middleweight, anyways. So now you're talking about that went on there, but ego got involved on that one, and I know I would have took hell coming in at 61 and a half, 62. So those are some things I don't regret, but I really kind of sit down and think about a lot, to the point of regretting I didn't make the other decision. But for the most part, to have 2 losses and 40 wins to 2 Hall of Fame fighters, 2 all-time greats like Bernard Hopkins and Martinez. No, I mean, there's not too much I would change in a career like that. 40-2, 34 knockouts.
Kelly, how different do you think your career would have been or could have been if you were active during this social media age that, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter? Do you think, how do you think it would have affected your career?
I wasn't one of those flashy guys. I was a quiet guy. And I liked it. And then most of your badasses are the ones that are quiet. If you ever notice, guys who can fight and who can hit. So I was never the guy really to go out there and make a big splash on social media or go cause controversy, So I don't know if social media would have benefited. I was talking about this the other day, though. I've been in this big kick on, I see, obviously sitting at home, there's nothing else to do. And I unfortunately got involved in some of these boxing groups, which is like torture to me to sit here and read some shit these people put. But, it's going on some of the old fights. And we tapped on this on my podcast. It's some of these old fights where people, they can't do no wrong, like 70 fighters, the Fab Four, guys like that. And my Fab Four, I say all the time, is guys like De La Hoya, Shane Mosley, Trinidad, Floyd Mayweather, Hopkins. You can put them guys in there. And I actually broke down on BoxRec, the title defenses. Them guys from the late 90s, mid-90s, and early 2000s, their records were crazy good, and their title defenses. And there was a lot more than any other era, too, of title fights. So I guess where I'm going with that is some of these, if social media was around in the 70s, 80s, the careers would have been totally different. I'm telling you that, just a little bit ago, Canelo jumped up to 68 and fought the one guy, and he went to 75 and jumped up 2 weight classes to beat a good Kovalev. And he gets bashed on social media for it. And you have some of these big-time world champions, all-time greats. They were fighting guys 1-3 for a title defense. And nothing's ever said about that. You know what I mean? Most of their title defenses were against guys with records of 28-12 and shit like that. Today, the fights wouldn't even be passed by the commission. You would not be able to see Floyd Mayweather go fight a guy 1-4. But guys like Duran and like that were able to. You know what I mean? So if social media is crazy today, and believe me when I tell you, if that was around in the way it is today, you'd have been seeing people saying stuff, or maybe not. Maybe times were just different.
Do you think if you were coming up today with your martial arts background, do you think you'd have gone boxing or UFC, or MMA, shall I say?
Well, first of all, let's slow down with the martial art background. I only did 3 classes of taekwondo. But I will tell you this: I'm interested in it. I have my son in jiu-jitsu right now, and I think it's a great art. I think really good boxer or who knows how to use his hands and also be good on the ground grappling. Those are the 2 biggest ones to learn, in my opinion. But I'm a fan of it. I got a lot of friends in UFC, but it all came around. It really got big towards the end of my career, and once I retired, I didn't want to get punched no more, let alone go get hit with elbows and flying.
Do you have any favorite MMA fighters at the moment? Do you keep up with Bellator, UFC? Do you have any favorite guys?
A good buddy of mine. I love the guy to death, and we've had fun a couple times now. Matt Brown. the Immortal. So,
Oh, good fighter. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a cool guy, and don't want to piss him off. He don't play around much, but he's a cool guy.
He's been in the UFC for a long time.
Yeah. I think he's trying to get one more fight. I think Matt's around my age, maybe a year younger than me. So, but again, too, with MMA, I don't know the age, the time frame with those guys, because it is a little different. If you get somebody down on the ground, when you get somebody on the ground, I don't think age has as much to do at that point.
It's true.
Well, Kelly, we're coming up on an hour here, so we appreciate it. We know you're a couple hours ahead of us. We're over here in Southern California, LA area. So, obviously we appreciate it. We appreciate the time you gave us here on the last round this week. Before we let you go ahead and plug your podcast, your gym, anything you got upcoming. I know we're all stuck inside, but go ahead and plug whatever you got, man.
Well, I appreciate you allowing me to. As far as my gym is in Columbia, Ohio, nobody's going to come there for that. But, but I got the boxing gym. So just keep an eye out for some of the things. I'll let you guys know when my sports testing, me and my partner's sports testing starts taking off. And the podcast is The Punchline with Kelly Pavlik and James Dominguez. You can find it. Just go to punchline.live which we're on YouTube also, or Facebook. We do a show on Facebook Live. And that's at The Punchline with Kelly Pavlik and James Dominguez.
All right, Mike, go ahead where they can find our show.
It's at The Last Round 12 on Twitter and Instagram, and then all the usual major podcast platforms and the Boxing Social YouTube page.
All right, and obviously we'll see you guys next week. I'm Danny Z.
For my you guys to share, and I'll put this out there too to help you guys.
Go ahead.
Let me get a shout out, so I'll do the same.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate that. So for my co-host, Michael Shepard, I'm Danny Z. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round